Hi, everyone. Welcome. We are going to get started in just about 1 minute. I want to give folks time to log in. So we'll be back in just about a minute. Okay, everyone, let's go ahead. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. My name is Colleen Gustitis, and I'm the Director of Product Marketing at Cofense. I'd like to thank you all for joining us for today's webinar entitled 2024 State of Email Security. Over the last year, cybersecurity threats have continued to increase, and probably to no surprise to anyone here, email was still the #1 threat vector for 2023. It makes sense. Email serves as the primary form of communication for businesses of all sizes. The consequences, though, of your company falling victim to an email attack can be disastrous, with potential impacts on a company's financial ability, reputation, and even the relationship that company holds with customers and employees being at risk. Staying vigilant and staying informed about real and relevant threats is just one part of the holistic approach to email security. We need to have a vigilant email security strategy to protect companies from cybercrime. That's why we're here today. The Cofense intelligence team has conducted sensitive research and analysis to bring you this information to help you and your team stay informed on emerging threats and to strengthen your organization's security posture. Joining us today are Josh Bartolome, Vice President, Global Threat Services here at Cofense, Rachel Roldan, our Vice President of Product, Dawn Creeder, who is our Senior Director of Product Management for our phishing detection and response products, and Jared Slotich, Product Manager for our intelligence offerings. Welcome, Josh, Rachel, Dawn, and Jared, and I want to thank you very much for giving your time today and your expertise. Just a couple of housekeeping topics before we get started. I'm going to go ahead and turn to the agenda. Sorry about that. We are going to cover on the agenda today, we'll start out with a brief discussion about Cofense and how we approach email security. We'll then report on the state of email security based on the research and data analysis we conducted over the last year. We'll then move on to specific trends our team saw in 2024 that will help inform your approach to 2024 security measures. And then we'll briefly talk about some notable events and what those could mean for 2024. And I'll follow back up at the end with some closing thoughts based on what the data said in 2023 in an effort, again, to prepare your teams for a stronger posture for 2024. After that, we'll open it up to Q&A. Just know you can always ask your questions throughout the presentation in the Q&A box as part of this portal here on the right-hand side. And then we will open it up and to the speakers and they can answer the questions. If for any reason we don't get to your question, we will follow up with you individually to make sure that you get your questions answered. This webcast is being recorded and everyone here today will receive a link to the recorded session once the webcast has concluded. On the right side of your console, you'll find links to some helpful email security related resources. Please feel free to peruse those as you see fit. Now that all of that is over, I'm going to turn it over to Rachel to get us started. Rachel?
All right, thank you, Colleen. So let's kick things off. And first, let's talk about who we are, who is Cofense, and what we bring to the market. And reality is that security threats continue to grow year over year, not only in volume, but also in complexity. Attackers are crafty, right? And their techniques are really evolving. They're thinking outside the box to really gain access, get in there, get inside your organization. And with those attacks constantly evolving, so does your organization's email security, right? They go hand in hand, which is why effective email security starts and ends with Cofense. We see and stop threats that SEGs miss, and that stems from our network of over 35 million trained employees who have been conditioned to not only identify, but then also report threats. And we talk about layers and layered security defenses. And that first layer is really what's going to help you condition your users to identify and report. And that is through our PhishMe simulation SAT solution set. So why is training so important? Well, because every single day, our Cofense analysts see thousands of threats that are bypassing SEGs. And that's not just one SEG or a specific set of SEGs. Cofense ingests SEGs from all across the board, all vendors, and in near real time. And in 2023, we did see over 100% increase in the number of malicious emails bypassing those SEGs per customer. So we touched on that first layer of defense. That second layer and solution set is what we call our phishing detection and response, or PDR. And that provides those capabilities to automatically detect, tag, and auto-quarantine those SEG misses as they enter into your network. And over the last 12 months, we have observed SEGs really struggled to keep up with the evolving threat landscape. And a lot of that had to do with not only the volume, but the variety and the variation of the attacks that were performed. And we know this because of the sheer number of malicious emails and phishing campaigns that our PDR solution set detected over the last few years that the SEGs missed. And just to give you some data points, in 2023, we saw a 37% increase in malicious threats compared to 2022. And then we saw a 310% increase in threats compared to 2021. And that wasn't just from one particular phishing vector. We saw a variety of phishing attacks across the board, including some new ones, others that were not new, but we saw ramp up throughout 2023. And a few of those examples are what you see there on the screen, which we'll dive into in just a little bit. So looking at all of this data more in a time-based format, this equals Cofense saw a malicious email bypass a SEG every minute, every single minute. That's huge. And again, why it is so important to not settle for standard or good enough or rely on a single aspect to protect you. As Colleen mentioned, really it only takes one breach, right, to damage that reputation, and that's in multiple different forms. You know, financial status, your brand, your impact to customers, and even down to your employees. You know, you might see it in the news every single day, another breach that happened. You also may have been impacted by it personally by being notified from a vendor that you use, which again is why it's so important to have those multiple layers of defense. So let's review some of the key findings we uncovered during our data investigations, or what we like to call our big rocks. That first one, Colleen mentioned it, but it's probably not a shock to most, is that email is still the #1 attack vector. Now, we did see an uptick in things like smishing, which is text, and phishing, voice, but still the leader continues to be email. And again, not surprising, because as you think about it, carrying out those attacks, it takes a lot less effort to send out a mass phishing email than it does to set up an SMS or voice system. That second one there, credential phishing, continues to increase year over year. And we've continued to look at this trend. And it's been pretty clear that credential phishing is not slowing down. It has continued to increase year over year. And we also saw that many of the newer attacks that were carried out used credential phishing as the attack method, and that includes things like QR codes and impersonation. And in fact, 91% of active threat reports that we published last year centered around credential phishing. Next is going to be the attacks are getting more sophisticated. Increase in vishing, smishing, QR codes, brand impersonation. And that was in many different styles and even including themes. You know, we did see a new theme this last year in travel assistance, which we haven't seen in the past. But if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense with the increase in brand impersonation attacks we've seen. Next is going to be those top targeted industries that we saw in 2023. Industry-specific SEG misses were up across the board, right, which makes sense with the volume that we saw. And the last few years, two of those most targeted industries have been finance and healthcare, and those were once again at the top of the list. Looking at the metrics just by pure volume, though, we did see that real estate and retail were the most targeted industries by volume. And then when you look at it from year over year increase by percent, we actually did see new industries emerge, with key targets being the real estate and management industries. And last one you see there on the screen is the rise of malware families. We really saw the evolution of those advanced malware campaigns, which were using pretty evasive tactics and techniques to disrupt the threat landscape. And we're going to dive into those in just a little bit. But now I'm going to pass it over to Jared, who's going to talk a little bit more about some additional trends that we saw.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. And this will be just a quick overview of some of the topics that we'll dive further in depth on in the following slides. But just really quick, going over the top trends of 2023. Overall, we did see a 67% volume increase in credential phishing. So from our perspective in the email security arena, we kind of divide our analysis into two main buckets of credential phishing and all other malware. Now, that's a drastic oversimplification of the analysis work that we do. But specifically talking about credential phishing, that accounts for a very, very large volume of all either anomalous or malicious activity within emails, coming from threat actors and other other actors that would mean our customers harm. So the fact that we saw such a marked increase in volume shows that it is still popular. And why is it still popular? Because it's still effective. Email allows anybody from anywhere in the world to reach the people within your company or the partners that you're working with. They don't have to actually get inside the network in order to establish contact. So what we're seeing and what we're continuing to see over the years here is that email has maintained its popularity as an initial attack or at least contact vector. And we do predict that this will continue because it has in the past, so it will in the future. This is what we mean when we say that it is a gateway to other types of attacks. Emails themselves are not malicious, but they do help, or they often are that first initial contact that we will see between an actor and its victim, and their victim. So these other type of attacks can be anything from continued credential phishing campaigns or the implant and initiation and execution of malware to do things like credential stealing. Credential stealing is, as I'm sure most of the audience here knows, an activity or an event that is meant to harvest users' credentials. What are those credentials, though, right? Loosely, we can define it as PII, but it's not quite that, right? It's your user IDs, it's the passwords, it's anything that that can be used to authenticate to a company or an organization's systems. Those credentials need to be protected as trade secrets for the employees that have them under their purview and use them in their daily operations. So obviously, you can see how those would be very valuable to a malicious actor or a threat actor or attacker. And how do they get them, right? So email has with it this assumption of not necessarily trust, but in legitimacy. There is a legitimate way of contacting and connecting with other people who have something to tell you. So if an attacker is able to successfully lower some of the defense mechanisms that we have built into us through our training, also through our gut instincts, through our normal operations, if something seems out of place, crossing those defense barriers to establish trust with the victim or potential victim is oftentimes the intent that we see within these credential phishing campaigns. It's not. Sometimes it manifests itself as very targeted attacks, such as spear phishing. So those types of messages that are going to target particularly senior people within the company with very tailored messages. But also it can be a more broad message that plays upon people's emotions, their fears. Think any type of current event. Here in the U.S., we are in an election year, so we will see more and more credential phishing campaigns target around politics, for example. But we're also seeing the implementation of machine learning and AI models that have essentially enabled threat actors to be more prolific. These tools are serving as force multipliers, allowing them to create more tailored and seemingly genuine messages that reach a larger audience with greater effectiveness, efficiency as well. The last point that we have here is that hackers will often sell the data they collect on the dark web. So this is just one of various things that they do with the information. Historically, in the past, credentials have been somewhat expensive, or at least they were not an average commodity that just anybody can purchase. As we saw within 2023, however, due to various global factors, some of it economic, but also the availability of harvested credentials and pilfered credentials on the dark web, prices are actually extremely affordable. Does it make it not worth, the juice not being worth the squeeze here? Not necessarily, right? This just means that your credentials are able to be purchased by, or there's a lower barrier of entry to purchase these credentials that have been stolen. So the attacks are still happening, information is still being stolen, and it is still being sold to other people who would mean you ill. So as I said, we will be diving more into some of the major campaigns and some of the themes that we saw here in the following slides. So I believe I will be handing it back to Rachel to cover QR codes.
Yep, thanks, Jared. And talking about credential phishing, shifting into QR codes, we did see a lot of QR codes in 2023, and a lot of those were centered around credential phish being the method. And QR codes in itself was and still is to be a very hot topic. Into early 2023, we started to see that ramp up and a large amount of QR code phishing campaigns come through. And it really did not slow down throughout the entire year and even into 2024. And so much so that here at Cofense, we observed over a 331% increase in QR code active threat reports issued. And QR codes themselves have not historically been popular just due to the way that you have to interact with them. But as attackers look for new vectors, they discovered that QR codes had many benefits to using them, right? So a couple of those characteristics there is that it's going to apply both at work and at home. As the world shifted to using QR codes in our everyday life, this wasn't an uncommon practice or ask to scan a QR code, right? Getting a menu at a restaurant, scan a QR code, or even watching a TV commercial to claim something, right? They're now using it that way, or to authenticate to a work application. So it's very much now become the normal in our everyday lives, which is why it wasn't uncommon to be asked to scan a QR code. And with those QR codes, right? That whole concept is to take out a device, and more often than not, it's going to be your own personal device. And by using that personal device, scanning that QR code, is more than likely going to put you outside of your organization's protection and any type of enterprise controls that are in place. And you know, a lot of people say, well, why can't I just use a file and detection software or even image scanners? And while you can set those up, the malicious content can be in many different forms crafted to bypass these tools. A couple examples of those being they're hiding the phishing link inside the QR code image, or they have embedded images in an image attachment, such as a PNG, or even an attachment file like a PDF or a Word. So they're getting very crafty in how they're embedding the malicious content inside of the QR code themselves. And then impersonation and spoofing, right? The appearance of legitimate sites and domains. Attackers are using common domains in the strings and the URLs like Bing and Google, or even those credential landing pages appear to be a login from a trusted website. So again, they're using impersonation on top of that. And as mentioned, it's not going to slow down. We don't predict it's going to be. We're going to continue to see QR codes evolve. And when we first started seeing QR code attacks, the themes were a lot of the times around multi-factor authentication as the lure. But more and more as we're seeing these campaigns come through, we're starting to see the shift to utilize just a wide variety of email themes across the board, and we'll continue to monitor that. So I'm going to pass it over.
And Rachel, I actually wanted to add one thing to your point here insofar as like the continued evolution. When we first started seeing QR codes, the QR code itself was its own image. So detection, like you said, you can look for an image file and potentially work with that. But we've actually seen, you know, that cat and mouse game, that continual evolution where now the email body is a picture and the QR code's a part of the bigger picture. Or we've even started to see, you know, in a couple of instances where the QR code was a multi-part image. So it was actual multiple images. So even if you were to scan it, it would actually just be a portion of. So to your point, it's that continuous evolution and change. And that's why QR codes are still kind of a hot topic, because they're not slowing down. They're just keep iterating on how they're delivering it.
Yep. All right. Yeah. Josh, I think I'm passing it over to you.
Well, it's actually a good segue then. So, you know, in relation to that, we are seeing a lot of other, you know, similar types of attack that do want to remove you from that security boundary, from your company's security visibility. Phishing is actually one of the items that we've seen a good increase in. For those not familiar, phishing is voice phishing. What we've seen, you know, within Cofense is that these emails, you know, report that either you bought something, you have an invoice, you know, something along those lines, something was already purchased either on your corporate card or personally, you know, purchased by you. And if you have a problem, if there's a question, if you need a refund, call us here at this number. And you call, and the commonality of this game is you call, they'll ask for your, you know, pay information, whether it's a credit card or an account, bank account, and so they can quote unquote refund you. And obviously at that point, they're not going to refund you. They're going to try to, you know, take your money, so to speak. But again, the concepts are the same as with the QR codes insofar as it's getting you outside of the boundary. It's making you place a phone call that now is an interaction. And what we found over time, you know, doing some comparative analysis between phishing and other forms of voice phishing, we found that, you know, based on the numbers we were able to extrapolate, 85% of phishing attacks start with an email. Now that's compared to what we've seen so far in the smishing realm, as well as just the standard, you get a spam phone call. And, you know, by volume. Now, why would email be easier or more prevalent than, you know, smishing or just picking up the phone and calling? Because of the mechanisms of deployment, like Rachel alluded to earlier in this conversation. The, you know, setting up a method of actually, you know, war dialing phones and then presenting voice clips and then having somebody on the other end, it's time consuming and costly. Same thing with being able to send broad scope SMS, you know, smishing attacks. It's costly. Sending an email is cheap. Sending millions of emails is cheap. So, you know, if you have an expected success rate, you know, 0.1%, would you rather spend, you know, send 1 million emails or comparatively only be able to do 10,000, you know, smishing or, you know, voice direct phone call phishings? So that makes a lot of sense from an attacker perspective. It's economy of scale. Now, with all of this, what we're seeing is right? And relatively, brand impersonation's always been a thing, right? It's kind of always been a problem we're seeing, but we are seeing an increase in brand impersonation. When you look at the fact that most organizations are easily using anywhere from, half a dozen to a dozen or more different SaaS providers, it's not uncommon for us to get an email from a brand. I'm not going to say any brands here, but like a Microsoft login. In Rachel's previous slide, the QR code for Microsoft MFA, two-factor, or receiving something from Salesforce, a report from Salesforce, or kind of everybody kind of knows the SaaS providers. So we're used to those emails. Attackers are mimicking these styles now and just blatantly impersonating these vendors. And obviously, if I'm in a finance team and I start getting, or a sales team, I should say, and I start getting emails from Salesforce and, please click here, you got to do this immediately, validate this, here's a report, I'm probably going to click on things. So we are seeing an increase in these volumes. And again, the increase is because they are working. People are falling for these problems. And these attackers are always trying to find that next iterative step to basically obtain victims. And with all of this, what we're seeing with overall brand impersonation, phishing, according to the FTC, last year, they estimated around, or over, I should say, 1.2 billion lost financially. And that's really what they know about. The real feeling of losses is that's easily 10 times the amount when you talk about it from a global perspective. That being said, I'm going to pass it back over to Jared to talk about some malware tactics.
All right. I know a little bit about that. Thanks, Josh. Yeah. Malware tactics. So we spend here in Cofense Intelligence, we spend pretty much every day in and around malware, identifying the attacks and instances of it, ripping them apart, doing the forensics on them, seeing what they do. And more importantly, from an intelligence perspective, who their targets were. What is the intended effect, right? What is the intent of implementing the malware here? And what we've seen is continued evolution, right? I mean, that's kind of a no-brainer. In order to survive, it's Darwinism within cyberspace. So as we have seen, particularly in 2023, but as recent as earlier this week, international law enforcement entities are starting to become very effective at taking down malware. And that's everything from the actors themselves to primarily the infrastructure. And they are actually executing these operations on a global scale to take these botnets, these form stealers offline to completely disrupt the operations of the attackers. Obviously, when we first started seeing some of these operations being launched, we met them with a raised eyebrow and a bit of a critical view of how effective they would be. Much to our chagrin, we've been very pleasantly surprised that we have seen some very severe effects for all the positive reasons that you would hope for. However, in order to survive, threat actors in their operations and in the malware itself have had to continue to evolve. Not just to circumvent and survive these law enforcement operations, but also to continue circumventing continuously more stringent and strict security apparatuses that we are implementing. So it's that traditional cat and mouse game that continues to this day. In the second bullet there, you'll see DarkGate and PikaBot. And if you're unfamiliar with those, just know that generally speaking, that is what replaced CACBot. So as I was just talking about last year, or what I was talking about, the first operation, the large operation last year, was the CACBot takedown that happened in late summer, July, August into September. This was, again, a multinational law enforcement agency effort that seized and dismantled the CACBot botnet infrastructure. Now, no arrests were made at that time. I'm not sure if any have been made since then, but effectively what it did was it took CACBot offline. So overnight, we saw a 100% to zero drop in activity. There is still some lingering traces of it, but CACBot is now a measured and known quantity. And so it has effectively been rendered ineffective. Now, here on the intelligence side of the house, that's not good enough, right? We continue to monitor and look at the activity that is happening both during, before, and after events like this. And what we saw was that there was, within that vacuum of the CAC botnet, we started seeing some similar tactics, techniques, and procedures from other malware types such as DarkGate and PikaBot. Now, in deconstructing not just the malwares themselves, but the implementation methods, it was eerily similar to what we were seeing in the CACBot actors MO. So we were able to, with a certain degree of reasonable belief, assume that they had pivoted to using DarkGate and PikaBot. That's what they're going to do. Continued evolution for survival so they can continue their operations, right? As I teased earlier here in this conversation, though, as early as or as late as earlier this week, there was another large operation, again, multinational law enforcement, titled Operation Kronos. Now, this one was actually targeted at, sorry, my notes here, at the Lockbit ransomware. Now, this one was slightly different from the CACBot takedown because in addition to seizing all of their infrastructure, they also did make some arrests in Poland and Ukraine. And there also have been charges filed against a couple actors in Russia as well. Now, this is great news for all of us. This means that from the very beginning of detection and analysis to defending ourselves, we're actually seeing our protectors go on the offensive to dismantle these massive nets and operations in order to stop them, right? So it's really great to see these things. And again, as I mentioned, an intelligence entity like ours here is going to continue to monitor those and see what the fallout effects are, see what replaces them, see how these threat actors are pivoting, and then obviously report that, update our signatures in order to make sure that everyone under our purview is best protected. Now, there is also the tried and true existing malwares that still exist to this day, and none is a better example of that than Agent Tesla. Now, Agent Tesla is a remote access Trojan, but it has grown and adapted and become so multifaceted over the years that the current versions of it are just barely even relate to its initial implementation. It is so easy to use and so adaptable that it can really hit any target with minimal configurations, and that's part of the reason why it's so popular. Kind of related to that, though, is also the formbook malware. Now, formbook is as you would suspect, it is a form stealer. So what that means is that it can steal things from like your HTML forms within your browser, or even gain access to like your copied content within the clipboard within your operating system. So that one has existed since I think 2016 was the first instance of it in the dark web forums when it was first actually published. It has grown and evolved since then as well. And it will continue to survive because it is so adaptable. It is easy to use. It is accessible. So you don't need some large state-sponsored threat actor to implement these tools or even develop on them. They can be pulled down from these repositories and implemented to however the threat actors see best fit. We also do see a lot of snake keylogger still. Snake keylogger and its variations. It's not always called snake, but basically this is one of those keystroke stealers, right? And this is another one that is delivered. So remember back to the previous slide where we were talking about how email is one of those great first contact vectors. Well, after establishing contact, they will try to deliver, the threat actors will attempt to deliver these malware via downloadable forms, mislabeled files, or directing the potential victim to go to a repository elsewhere that's where the files would then be accessed, pulled down, and the attack would be initiated from there. Now, continuing on what I just said, one thing that we would like to highlight, because it is something that we saw the advent of last year, is Google AMP, or AMP, if you will. Now, AMP stands for Accelerated Mobile Pages. And what this is, at a high level, it's Google's implementation of of mobile-friendly resources, or it's an open source HTML framework that helps web pages adapt to mobile views easier. Now, part of why this is notable, though, is because threat actors have been using Google AMP and other similar services, such as like the smart links from LinkedIn, to actually host a lot of their malicious content. And why this is very notable is because when you have a legitimate domain up front, such as google.com/UK, google.com, that will oftentimes allow the bypass of security appliances, because they see that the top level is hosted by a legitimate sender or hoster. And thus attackers have been able to very successfully this past year use legitimate services like Google AMP, like smart links from LinkedIn, in order to host their malicious content, but also kind of use it as a bit of a pseudo C2 element as well, because it enables a in quotes legitimate path of communication to a known good domain. That is all I had for that. Josh, I saw you nodding. I didn't know if you wanted to mention anything else about the smart links or the top level domains being used by attackers there, as we lead into BEC, because I think it is kind of related.
It can be, but I mean, from the domains and related, we're constantly seeing different services exploited by attackers, and exploited might not even be the right word, because in some instances they're leveraging the services provided by that company that owns the domain, but using it for malicious purposes. So if it's a website builder and hoster, they're using that service to build and host malicious websites or endpoints. But hey, it looks like it's coming from gooddomain.com, but really it's that the subdomain that's random and that the attacker is using. So there's always got an eye to caution that it needs to be done with that. Even if it is a known domain, is it a known link and service that your organization or that you personally have used in the past? Because we've seen obviously that quite a lot. But relating to BEC specifically, so just kind of to real highlight it for those who are not familiar, BEC is business email compromise. So BEC does start with an email. Oftentimes the email purports to come from somebody in power within your organization, CEO, VP, C-level, executive suite. And it's generally the first engagement with a BEC email is a very quick, I need you, I need help. Are you available? Can I call you? What's your number? Call me, here's my number, with the email address looking like it's coming from the individual that it's purporting to be. Like, again, executive suite, CEO, CFO, how have you. Now, what generally happens, we've actually did a study on this last year, and what happens is now there's a small little email engagement. You respond back, thinking it is your CEO. I'll just use CEO as the who's being spoofed here. And, yes, I'm here. What do you need? Here's my phone number. And then they'll start to engage back and forth with you, oftentimes trying to move it to your cell phone. So that way it's either, or whether it's texting or whether it's verbal. Texting, same thing kind of like with the phishing. So it gets it out of your security stack, your organization's security stack. And really they're trying to build that initial rapport and urgency with you, with the intended victim. And generally speaking, the goal of this is to get money from you, whether it's cryptocurrency, whether it's buy me some gift cards because I have a customer, I'm trying to seal the deal and I need $500 of Google, Play gift cards. Or I'm at a show and I'm talking to a customer and I need, $300 of Apple gift cards to give to the customer as a thank you, things along those lines. And it's more successful than most people would think. Last year, kind of the FBI is reporting that over 51 billion in exposed business losses. It's been a growing problem year over year over year. And it does often target specific groups or specific, departments within your organization. Human resources. Why human resources? Well, because they manage your direct deposit paperwork. They manage, compensation. So, having a BEC type of template where it actually is saying I need to change my direct deposit to this new bank account, here's all my information, is not uncommon. Attackers are keying on that, and they're actually now sending those emails and changing it to go to their bank account. Same thing, same thing with other types of benefits and disbursements that companies have, as well as invoices. They'll modify an invoice, or they'll contact saying, "Hey, here's you never paid this bill. Please pay it for me." Purporting to be a vendor. And this is a pervasive problem in basically 90% of the countries worldwide. Now, the common question I get is, what's the difference between something like this, BEC, and phishing? Because they both start with an email. Oftentimes, they both result in some type of verbal communication. The reality is phishing attacks generally apply more personal impact. Insofar as I got scammed, even though the email came into my work email address, into my, my work email, I personally lost the money. And really that did start as, personal targeting scams that now are just evolving into businesses because wider audience base, and the reality is because it works, so the attackers are just expanding their scope. BEC attacks generally are targeting enterprises, usually targeting very, specific enterprises or specific departments within those enterprises. With this, we also kind of always get the question, because we're talking about monetary loss. Well, where's the majority of loss come from with an organization when it comes to these types of attacks, whether it's just normal phishing attacks, whether it's phishing, whether it's BEC? The reality is the numbers are rough to identify because it all is based on reporting. Who's reporting what? And really nobody ever wants to show that they got egg on their face and how much an actual impact was. Don't get me wrong, there's been some legislation and changes over the last couple of years for reporting requirements, but even that type of impact, monetary impact, is generally hard to quantify. So the reality is, if you look at the popular statistics, anywhere between 85 to 97% of cyber breaches start with a phishing attack. That's, a cyber breach, depending on the scope of it, could cost you millions of dollars in remediation. Phishing, obviously a huge run insofar as, the 1.5 estimated and greater than billion. BEC, huge cost as well, based on what was reported and estimated by the FBI. It's hard to put a number on which one is bigger or worse. The reality is email attacks do cause an impact to organizations and businesses. BEC is absolutely one of those that we've seen that increase in threat, increase in urgency, and with everybody being remote lately, last couple of years mostly, I should say, the increase in being remote, don't see them actually slowing down anytime soon. That being said, if we can actually jump to the next slide, that kind of brings us to what is coming up, kind of what is the concern here? What are we looking at from a evolutionary stance, if you will, from the phishing threat landscape overall? Now, the reality is everybody's, talking about AI, generative AI, and related technologies. Are they a risk? Will they impact phishing? The candid answer is yes, because it just makes sense. How is it going to impact organizations? How is it going to impact the landscape? This is similar to, in my opinion, based on what we've seen, but also over the years, when malware generators started to be a thing. Before, back in the day, unfortunately, Jared's probably giggling too, because we've been in this field for a long time. Attackers would handcraft their own malware and send it out. And then they started making malware generators where you can just pick the options you want, hit generate, and boom, now you have a piece of malware. That caused an explosion in malware, hitting organizations, kind of the cyber landscape. The emergence of AI and AI generative technologies is going to have the same effect on phishing. It's going to give those that might not have the experience, scope, financial backing from an attacker group standpoint. It'll give the one-off people, the one-off attackers, the one-off hacker, the person in their basement, the power to actually create phishing attacks at volume and send them out at volume. So this would be, in my opinion, the equivalent of what the old school script kiddies were. It just allows them to kind of generate and deploy. With that, there is an expectation that obviously the more sophisticated phishing attack groups are also going to be leveraging this technology. How? Why? Well, one, it will allow them to dynamically generate realistic phishing emails with proper grammar, proper context at a much more rapid pace, relevant to things that are happening in the world. A lot of phishing attacks are thematic insofar as they map to geopolitical events, environmental events, economic events. And being able to create a phishing attack quickly, automatically, based on this country's having an election, there was a housing crisis, hurricane hit and destroyed this area, and trying to extort money for donations. Now they can automate a lot of that. Additionally, we see the potential there of these attacker groups doing iterative development. Phishing attacks evolve because they're always trying to bypass the email gateways, the security stack. And oftentimes it's not sweeping changes. It's a minute change that would allow it not to be checked, not to be scanned, or allow it to bypass whatever detection criteria algorithm that security appliance leverages. This type of generative creation capability could allow attackers to rapidly iterate and identify changes to the emails that they're sending that allow for more delivery to inboxes, so that actually our employees, our individuals actually see those emails more and kind of keep ahead of security technology. That's always a concern. There is a lot that can be said regarding AI and how we can actually leverage it on the same on our behalves overall, insofar as for protection and things along those lines. And there will be further conversations down the road, I'm sure, throughout 2024 on those topics. But from a threat perspective, I strongly believe that AI will end up being impactful as we see. So we all need to kind of take care. With that, I'm going to be passing it back over to Rachel.
All right. Thanks, Josh. I think we're on to the next slide, some closing summaries. And Colleen, you want to wrap us up?
I sure can. So first of all, I just want to say thanks for joining us today. We have observed, an immense amount of activity in 2023. So we just wanted to kind of summarize what we've seen, but I thoroughly encourage everyone to go onto the Cofense site, download the report itself. There's a lot more in there than we're able to cover here today. But just in summary, right, we're talking a lot over the course of the last few years. Email is still the primary threat vector for cybersecurity crimes. Even with some of the newer attacks like the phishing that takes you out of that comfort zone of your security posture for organizations within email, a lot of these attacks start with an email to your employees. We've talked a lot about seg misses. I still clearly take away from here that the fact that we are actually seeing a malicious email bypass the segs every single minute of the day. That's impressive and scary, right? But we're not saying that segs do not have a place in the marketplace. They play a critical role. However, everybody's goal is to get to the elusive 100% protection. And therefore, it is not good enough just to rely on your segs based on the information that we're seeing in the marketplace, with all segs being attacked and therefore things getting through. You need additional layers in addition to try to get to that 100%. Even though that's probably never going to be possible, having extra layers built into your security posture allows you to get closer to that. We are differentiated in the marketplace, so we like to talk about this because people don't necessarily realize that a Proofpoint seg sees what a Proofpoint seg misses. A Microsoft customer sees what a Microsoft seg misses. because of our diversity of customer base and the fact that we are agnostic to the segs, we see what all segs miss. So really, when we say good enough, email security is not good enough, it's because we're seeing what's coming through. And it's quite frightening to think that it only really takes that one breach. And yet we're seeing a malicious email bypass traditional email security protocols every single minute. Yes, there's a lot of technology out there. There's some folks who, still look at their employees and the human element of email security as a vulnerability. We believe that they can be a powerful defense against attacking hackers. And we really encourage folks to use their SAT programs, best practices, keep up on the latest and greatest in an effort to not only allow their employees to identify, but to create a really strong reporting culture, because we believe that's critical to success. And what we do here at Cofense is not only do we have all these Cofense trained employees that can identify and can report, but then that information is shared across the Cofense community. So a customer who reports an email or malicious email that is found to be malicious, that's then used in our phishing detection and response solutions so that other companies who haven't even seen that threat are able to actually leverage what was been reported in their environment from a proactive standpoint. We also believe that one of our differentiators is the quality of our intelligence, and that is really critical to success. We actually have an accuracy rate of 99.998% from a IOC perspective, and that is the result of a combination of those Cofense trained employees reporting, our phishing defense center, which is a manned SOC, and all the human vetted IOCs and reported emails that we see. And then there's also some proprietary sources. So we do not actually use any open source technology in our primary intelligence intelligence products that we use to evaluate malicious emails. We believe that we purposely made that decision so that there's less noise and we can be more accurate. And we think that that's incredibly differentiating for us in the marketplace and therefore to our customers. And then really, we want to be a provider that can really provide demonstrable value to our customers. So all of our products are fixed with dashboards and reporting tools so that you can keep your organizations informed at the highest levels how your security solutions are performing, how your employees are performing, not only against the company, but those businesses like yours. So with all that being said, we've kind of closed out the content we wanted to deliver today. We're going to open it up to Q&A, and I see we do have some questions coming in. So I want to go ahead and get started with that. So here's a question that we may have slightly addressed, but I want to read it out in case someone missed it. QR codes. So they aren't new. Why are we seeing a rise in that type of activity today?
I can chime in first, and then I'll have Josh and Jared to weigh in as well. So rising QR codes, it could be several different factors, but a lot of it stems from, I would say, everyday life, right? As we shifted in the world to using more QR codes, it's not uncommon to be able to do that. Whereas before, in previous years, being asked to scan a QR code wasn't something we normally or typically did or was asked to do. And so with that shift in the world, attackers also then shifted, right? And they're finding all of those TTPs to be able to find new tactics, procedures, be able to exploit those malicious emails and get in. And through that was QR codes. So that's, one factor that came into play with why we think they increased in popularity last year.
Great.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more, Rachel. And I think from the intelligence perspective as well, trying to suss out the intent of why they became more popular, why we saw an explosion there. And I think that a large portion is because there's a bit of implicit trust with that attack vector. First of all, you're shifting the medium. You're taking it from an image or the QR code itself, technically not an image, but sometimes they are embedded images from one source, and then you are instructing or asking the user to shift the vector to a separate source, being their phone, using a camera to then do the URL redirect. And what I mean by implicit trust there is that using a personal cell phone or even a company corporate issued cell phone that is issued to you, you do implicitly trust that device. You have your email on it, you have your text messages, those types of things. You use it every day to navigate, to look up things on the internet via that mobile device. So there is an inherited trust that you have with that device. So in scanning a QR code, it's a form of social engineering that they are playing off of there. So why did we see it explode? For the reasons that Rachel just said. But I think these things come and go. Much the same as we see with the popularity of certain malware families. They will kind of erect themselves out of seemingly nowhere. They'll be popular for a couple months and then they'll drop off, right? Because we get wise to them, we know to start looking for them. So it's going to be that ebb and flow activity.
Great. Thank you to both of you. We have another question. Do you find threats outside of what is human reported by customers? Why, how are Cofense the only email solution that sees what all segs miss? I don't understand that.
So I can help with this one. So yes, we do find threats outside of what are just human reported. However, we do focus on those as one of our primaries because those aren't just what have been reported. Those are what have gone through that entire email security stack and landed in an inbox. So those are considered our primary kind of, not bread and butter, but our primary focus. However, we do have multiple proprietary data pipelines and collection methods, methodologies, and implementations that we do collect emails from around the globe, variety. Obviously, I can't get into the secret sauce, but think of it as, a variety of different types of spam traps, open relays, and related other mechanisms that we use from a research, and collective and correlation perspective. So we do have a broader source than just what is reported, but obviously we kind of focus and start with those from an intelligence perspective because that's more real-time, more impacting, more relevant to our customer base. But we do absolutely leverage other sources. The secondary question on this one, insofar as all seg misses, right? So and I'm just arbitrarily saying, if I'm within Proofpoint and one of my customers reports in that, hey, this email is malicious, I know that Proofpoint missed that. I don't know if any other seg missed that. Same thing with, just an organization. If I'm, company A, I can't say ABC, that's Google, XYZ, and I have the seg and one of my employees reports in, well, I know that seg missed it. The reality is within Cofense, across our customer base, we have customers that literally have every seg that is available for mid and large size organizations. So as we're going through all the malicious emails that we're identifying, we do see malicious emails going, making it through every single seg known, and we've done that correlation, some quantification. A lot of this data is also going to be in our annual report from that stance. So the reality is, it's not so much that we're the we have a corner on the market, so to speak, and so far, we're the only one that can do this. But the reality is, we kind of are right now the only one that can do this because of the way our organization is structured, because of the service that we provide, which is email, and phishing and email related threat specific. So that level of insight is not relatively common. So it does afford us the views that we're relaying here today.
Thanks, Josh. I appreciate it. Folks, we are literally at time. I wanted to make sure I just rounded out. Please, you will get a copy of this recording. Also, please take the time to download the report. There's a lot more in the report than we were able to cover here. We know that we didn't get to all of the questions that were asked, but I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. So we will follow up with you individually on any questions we weren't able to answer. For our customers attending, so any Cofense customer that's attending this webinar, please note that we are doing an exclusive customer-only roadmap webinar. It's coming up March 13th at 11 o'clock. We will be sending more details out to the customer base, letting you guys know how to register, but we hope to see you at that event online. I want to thank Josh, Rachel, Dawn, and Jared for taking the time today and sharing these great insights. I hope everybody found this to be valuable, and we look forward to speaking with you directly on how we can help you strengthen your security posture and protect your organization. So with that being said, I'm going to close out the webinar. Thank you. Have a great rest of your week, and we look forward to speaking with you in the future.